Radio check. Loud and clear.
KSL Sports and KSL Podcast present Mode Push, an American view of F1, starting now.
And I'm stuck. He's looking gut with his honestly.
I'm gutted. I'm absolutely gutted.
I enjoyed this so much. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, everybody, welcome on in. It's another edition of Mode Push, an American view of F1. Join us every week right here on our podcast. Alex Kirry here, my co-host as always. Dan Jimenez in studio, engineering expert and just former race life, but also now just a regular old F1 fan who might know a little bit too much about how cars work. Is that how we kind of put your...
My wife would describe me that way. Yeah.
Too much. You know what? I've just introduced way too many people to F1. And it's actually great because what it ends up being is I don't sound like a weirdo, a total weirdo.
Right, yeah.
I still have like...
You're not scaring people.
I still have who I call my mainstream friends.
Yeah.
They don't understand yet.
No.
Maybe they'll come around. Probably not. Like it's just... You're asking somebody to carve out time in the sports world where they're already invested. It's like asking someone right now, like, have you seen the world of cricket? Let me introduce you to Test cricket. It's a lot easier to consume. It's only 9 hours long. It's not 4 days long.
Gosh.
Jeez, I actually did. I had a guy come up to me at a baseball game, and he was like, I know you do that F1 podcast. Have you gotten into cricket? I'm like,
No.
I have no space for anything in my life.
That's not happening.
We have too many kids, and just like too many kids, I have too many sports that I follow. I don't have enough. It's a physics problem. I don't have enough love for everybody, okay, to go around. I barely fit F1 in. And you know what it ends up doing? It pushes out other loves in my life. So that's what ends up happening. I'm like, I still find time for the NFL and for college football and for NBA, as always, because I have to for my job. It's just part of the deal.
And F1's a good filler for the summer months, you know?
Yes.
It's kind of dry in the sports world elsewhere unless you're really into baseball. But,
1000%.
F1 can get you through the summer.
So, quite a week. We were able to sort of stomach all the last goings-on over the last few. It was really just an amazing race at Silverstone this past go. The British Grand Prix was so much fun, and almost 500,000 people showing up. It just feels like racing in Europe is back, and it's also gotten like a renewed interest, of course, because of the Netflix series across the world. It's not just America that's had this resurgence in the sport. I don't know if there's ever been a more popular time for F1. You tell me, though. Is it that early 90s, mid-90s, maybe, or even maybe prior to that, before I showed up and totally jumped on the bandwagon? Has F1 ever been this big? And maybe not numbers-wise, but at least like having a place at that sports table across the world like it does now.
Oh, no. We're in the glory days of F1 right now. It's the distribution power that they have just through all the Liberty Media taking over and realizing this is a media asset. Yes, it's a sport, but this is a media asset. We have to leverage it like a media asset. And they've done that now through so many different avenues, not least of which is the whole Netflix special that it's this is the most expansive, popular, the most respected the sport has ever been. And we can always look back in the glory years of there's the Schumacher era, the Senna era, but that was still diehards that were finding whatever ways they could to be able to tune into those races live. But it's as popular as it's ever been, while at the same time having it probably one of its most trying seasons in terms of competitiveness, where you've got all these new fans who kind of came out of the Netflix era and then the Max beating, kind of toppling Lewis as the new, champion in the sport. But now it's like he's almost winning by too much. So that's a little bit of the challenge that they're facing right now.
Future-wise, and I was looking at this today and I was like, I got to bring this up with Dan. I saw this mocked up picture I'm showing you right now on this Automotor und Sport out of Germany.
That's where all the best news
I know,
comes from.
When you have to listen, I will just tell you what happens when you get into F1. Everybody who's listening out there, you hit the translate to English button a lot in your life. You go over to a lot of stuff in German, a lot of stuff in Dutch. That you're clicking over. Like, please translate this in English. But a story that was off of this Automotor und Sport write up is about the FIA and about expansion, because we're basically talking about the idea of picking up expansion franchises in the sport that you love. It's hard to say, yeah, just give us some more teams over here. But the FIA has just approved the Andretti Autosport application.
Okay.
Which
so
is great news.
Approve the application, which means they're going to consider it, or does that mean that they're in?
I think that what's going to happen is they basically said, according to this article, that there are 4 teams that have applied for the Formula One a spot in the Formula One field. 2 are likely going to get that expansion, right? I think that the FIA feels really good about adding 2 more teams. Why wouldn't you?
I think that's in the rules that like the other
12 teams.
The teams have approved up to 12 teams.
Up to 12 teams. And Andretti Autosport has already been approved then application-wise, because you'll still have to go through a vote. And for some reason, and I'm showing you the mock-up I'm showing Dan here, as you're not able to see it, is the back of a current F1 car that somebody has mocked up with the Cadillac on the back of it.
Mm-hmm. Looks good.
I love it. Are you kidding? And now Ford is also, trying to get its pinchers on some things here in the sport, and it is. It's going to be It's going to be a motor manufacturer partnering up with Red Bull. I don't know exactly what that partnership's going to look like, but you're seeing a lot of American handprints going on in this sport. Other than just the media rights are owned by an American company. Okay?
Right. Yeah.
All of the growth that has happened in the hands of those guys. There's a lot of power sitting in America with the ability to be able to make these things happen. I don't know why the pushback is happening so much against the Andretti Autosport. Andretti and Cadillac combining forces, that just sounds like you're talking about a name that has an F1 championship tied to it, and a motor brand, a vehicle brand that is synonymous with high-end everything, which is what F1 is. I don't know. Are we watching the rest of the world suddenly push back on the American side of things because America is, quote unquote, taking over the sport? I've had to hear that in quite a few of the podcasts that I follow. It's really weird.
It does kind of smell of a bit of European uppityness that, they can't stomach that the fact what you just described, that the Americans have almost saved the sport in a way with Liberty Media. And so, the protests are odd. Like I read this week, I think Toto was saying that the new teams should have to qualify, based on time in order to race. It's a bit ridiculous. All it comes down to in the end is money. These existing teams in F1 want more than the prescribed $200 million, I think it is right now in the regulations. The buy-in, they want a $500 or a $600 million buy-in because that's what the market they think demands for it right now.
And that'd be probably well within that to ask that when you consider how much Alpine was valued at recently because of the additions of more investors and things. So you're talking about each team, they're give or take, but we're talking about each team having that $1 billion, note next to its name. I mean, I think Alpine was valued at like $795 or something like that.
Yeah, I think in U.S. dollars it was almost close to $1 billion.
$1 billion. So you're talking about, so Mercedes, you could just say, hey, that's going to be 1.5 to maybe even 2 times that. Same thing probably with Red Bull. Ferrari, certainly. Ferrari would be like the Cowboys, where they just never win, but they're like the bigger brand,
they're
right?
The most,
so they're most recognized, the most valuable, and most iconic, and so they might be above that $2 billion mark. But in an era when we're seeing teams across sports worth, 5 times that, when we're talking about football clubs in Europe and we're talking about American football in the United States, it doesn't seem like it's that crazy. Now, they were saying that you're going to probably see that trickle down. Liberty Media is allowed to reject or object to the applications.
Or do they have final say?
Would they really do it? There's no freaking way they would.
No, they want
American
this
team.
one. Yeah. So there's 4 total that are applying, and I believe one of the other ones is a Saudi kind of live golf type of situation. And obviously, there's a lot of races that happen in the Middle East. There's a Saudi CEO of the FIA, and I think if they're following the money, they're going to accept a U.S. team and a Saudi team. If they're trying to keep the hands that feed happy.
Fred Vasseur, team principal for Ferrari, said the nationality of these teams who are applying shouldn't matter. It can't just be a ticket just because somebody comes from the USA We already have an American team with Haas. Come on.
No, sorry.
The popularity of F1 is measured in more than just one way of nationalities. So there is that European pushback. And I think that Toto Wolff even kind of objected and said, look, American sports franchises are a closed circle. Well, that's rich coming from people who are trying to close the circle even more hardcore. I don't know what he's saying by that. Is he saying that like an American team gets involved and then suddenly it's the Steinbrenner family is operating the this F1 team, or Jerry Jones is operating the team? What we're talking about is the expansion of your sport at a rate that we've already never seen in these guys' lifetime. The reason that that people know who they are in the United States is because of this American media conglomerate who said, hey, let's make this thing happen. Let's put it on Netflix. Let's do this whole thing. It's a brilliant move. Don't stop there. But also don't just throw a team at somebody because they go, they're an American team, Get Andretti on it. Get Cadillac on it. It makes total sense in that way.
Yeah, it's a question too. If you're Liberty Media, where is the future expansion? Where's growth going to come from? It's not going to come from Europe. It's saturated. That market is saturated. F1 has been there for a very long time, and it's relatively new in the U.S. and it's a large market. So if you think about expansion of an international brand, it's like the U.S. market, the Chinese market, and everything else just kind of doesn't matter, right? And so it makes most sense that, like, if I'm Toto Wolff, if I'm Christian Horner, you have to think that if we want to raise the collective value of Formula One and our own brand, our own team's value, you just have to grow the sport in those markets where there's headroom. And, it's really the U.S.
So that's been kind of some of this week's situation here. But you're actually, I think, seeing movement toward that. If teams do veto a new team, they can actually technically race because of the FIA kind of giving that approval, but they wouldn't be a part of that F1 Concord agreement, so they could be racing without the possibility of winning any of the entry prize. And then at the end of the Constructors' Championship, they wouldn't be recognized as Formula One constructors, from that standpoint.
Fascinating.
They would be allowed to race in those races. They would have to live by the same this is according to what I was reading in this Autosport und Vehiculum, whatever it was.
That'd be a very American thing, just to give them the middle finger and be like, we're racing anyways, and we're going to win.
You're right. And
we don't need your money.
I don't need a couple $100 million. I mean, I will later, but just to force themselves into the sport and actually make it happen. So
I think they just see Cadillac and they see dollar signs and they see that balance sheet and they're like, make them pay $500 million instead of $200 million, and we'll all agree.
Yeah, and maybe if that entry is $600 million, $750, guess what? You're going to find some people who are going to do it.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
you're going to definitely,
especially when Toto's like the majority owner of Mercedes AMG F1. I mean, it just goes straight to him.
Right.
He's already the first billionaire in F1.
So is that like a little fake thing? Like, oh, we don't need more American ownership. I mean, I guess if I'll have to look at it, and then he goes back and he's like, yeah, this is going to be huge.
Yeah.
Okay. From an actual race standpoint, this week we had the British Grand Prix. We see the exit of Nick DeVries. The most exciting thing in this sport, aside from the rumors of course, adding more teams, the right in front of us rumors, of course, and now been confirmed that Daniel Ricciardo is going to be. And I've seen all of the mock-ups of him in his Alpha Tauri outfits and everything, and I thought, you know what? Great. Good for him. Danny Ric is back on the grid. And what are some reasonable expectations for this week in Hungary? This is a race that he's won before. But we're not talking about in a piece of machinery like this. And this week, Christian Horner was very, very quick to point out that is not a Red Bull car he is in. That engine in the back is the same engine we have. That is not a Red Bull car that he's driving. So what are the expectations this weekend for Danny Ric? Just like we're excited that he's there, and that's how we are supposed to look at it this weekend?
Yeah, I think it's the benchmark to Yuki. And the more that I read about this and I think about it, that's what all of this was about. And it was just trying to figure out, where is Yuki at? Because you could say, oh man, the car's terrible, but did they have two really bad drivers, in Yuki and Nick? Like, it was hard to know. Like, Nick was not a good metering stick for Yuki,
right,
and how he's progressing. And Red Bull has to answer the question of, what are we going to do about Sergio in 2025? Are we going to re-up him, or are we going to find a better driver to replace him? And the first place you go to is the guy you've been investing all this development into, and that's Yuki. But I don't think they have an answer yet. And I think as soon as they saw that Nick wasn't as fast as Yuki, and Nick's 28 years old, and you're just not going to continue and invest in developing a 28-year-old, you just have to say, okay, we need a new measuring stick to benchmark Yuki against, so put Daniel in there. And Daniel, the story goes that Danny Rick got in the Red Bull car after Silverstone to run the Pirelli tire test. And after a few shakedown laps, they put him on basically the same configuration as Max and Sergio. And his time on like lap 7 was fast enough to have been on the front row for qualifying in Silverstone. And so they just saw like, hey, he's still got it. He had been doing sim time, and there's all the talk about like, oh, Danny has developed some bad habits at these other teams that we're having to work through. But when he got out on track, he was just as fast as Max and faster than Sergio in qualifying. And so then it was like, okay, we've got our benchmark now. We have to figure out, is it the car or is it Yuki? Because we need to make a decision about Sergio Perez in the next 12 months.
So I did read a little bit more this week about how it went down in for the British Grand Prix as well, because Danny Rick was, you're limited in the amount of time you can put these guys in a seat, and you can do some simulator stuff. You can have them test tires. You can have them run some cars, but you don't really know what you're getting. And one thing that everybody's trying to kind of sandbag expectations for him, because they're like, yeah, he's fit, but who knows at the end of a race how. One thing that he brought up, and it's the kind of stuff that we don't even think about necessarily, was Christian Horner goes, and Ricciardo actually is like, he hasn't been using those the braces for the headrest as much, and so that's a really good sign of a guy's neck being strong enough. That we forget about how much physical strain goes into this thing.
Yeah,
and it doesn't matter that you're a reserve driver and you need to be ready to race at all times. You actually might not be in racing shape like you were, but when they saw him. They actually said he was a bit of a dog when he first got in the car at the beginning of the year and doing his like sim test, things like that.
Yep.
He was really far behind. And then suddenly when it came to them running, they ran him 100 laps at the British Grand Prix on some tire tests, right? 100 laps, and they basically start getting all these times back, and they went, if Nick doesn't have an extremely good weekend, he's gone. And it was based off of those 100 laps on a lot of other things. But then they said the last kind of final tryout was, one, how would you feel being in an Alpha Tauri? Because it's not a Red Bull car.
Right.
And two, how would you feel about doing these 100 laps? And if you do well, would you be willing to kind of, and I think he thought it was going to be after the summer break. And then because Helmut Marko is a
wild man,
a little bit of a tyrant, at the very least, you talk about a team that's tough to be a member of. The expectation is, we're talking about Sergio Perez being gone maybe at the very least of the end of his contract. Maybe they even just buy him out because they're so disappointed with how things have gone. And he's been the only other guy who's won a race this year on the grid, and he's still second in the construction. Yes, he's won in the drivers' championship. And they're going, this guy's a dog. Like, he better figure it out, or we're canning him. And it's just so fickle. And Danny Rick has earned his way back in. I think that's the point. He's earned his way back in. He's not just a shot in the dark. And I think that because they have that prior relationship, they're just hoping that version, that the old Danny comes back, the old Danny Rick comes back, and he's so good for the sport. I think it also adds to that as well.
Yeah, I feel like he's just playing with house money this season. The expectations, I'm sure, are low because the perception is that the car is a dog, and so he can come in. He can, warm up a bit and then just show that he's faster than Yuki. And, I think he's warming up to a 2025. There's news today that, he's pitching himself as the replacement driver for Sergio. Like, he's making that pitch to Red Bull, and this is his first, initial tryout. And it'll be interesting to see if they extend him into 2024, because there's Liam Lawson, who's like the other Red Bull development driver who's racing in Super Formula over in Japan right now. And, there were a lot of questions around like, well, what about Liam? Why didn't they just promote him? And, in the interviews with him, this week he said he actually didn't want that. Like, he's been having a good season. He just wants to finish out the season, and it's it would have been a lot more pressure to throw Liam in there and expect results before the end of the year than Danny Rick, and the expectations for him.
It's kind of hard too, because Red Bull is notoriously, I mean, the Helmut Marko, he picks everybody himself.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's the talent picker. And obviously he bounces a lot off of Christian Horner, but like Helmut Marko goes, get Nick out, and then goes, tell me what those times were on Danny's test, over the weekend. And then he's like, boom, gone. I'm calling Nick up myself, and he did. I mean, this is a guy who does it all himself and picks all the talent himself. And it's been really, I mean, they have Max, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe one of the best racers in the history of the sport by the time it's all said and done. And so, that's an absurd standard to hold everybody else to.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also weird, too, because you also don't want to bring somebody in who is, cramping Max's style. Last thing you want to do is you don't want to create such a weird dynamic that the team suffers from the whole thing. Because, first and foremost, you got to take care of Max, and whoever gets in that second car in 2025, which just bums me out even talking about that, because I like Checo. I like Checo a lot.
Yeah.
His performance has just been, and they straight up are like, yeah, he's been garbage going into the races. He's had unfortunate kind of things that weren't in his control, but a lot of them were self-inflicted.
Mm-hmm.
And those things are the things in F1 that just get you canned right away. And especially Helmut Marko, he'll go, I'll just figure out a way to get this guy out of here. He's terrible. Second place in the drivers' championship.
Yeah, the interview with Christian that I read today, just he kept saying, well, there's Sergio's our guy for 2024, and then this is helping us get more data and information for 2025. But it felt like he was kind of protesting too much. Like he was, I think, kind of walking the line of, hey, we have a contract with Sergio, and so I have to say that this isn't about 2024.
He's our guy till 2025, right?
But I think that I wouldn't put it past them to buy Sergio out. If Danny ends up being that fast, then I think you have to promote him. But I think if anyone's now on the hot seat, it's Yuki. I think he has to show that he is as fast as Danny Rick.
That it is kind of a that'll wake you up, right? Where you're like, by the way, everyone's talking about this like you're next, dude. And the good thing is that Yuki's had a pretty decent year, but as things have kind of progressed, you've seen some teams fall back performance wise, and Alpha Tauri has been one of those teams where you're going, dude, you guys were doing really well at the beginning. Yuki was right on that 10th, 11th place like every week it seemed like, right? And now that's Williams, right? Now
they've traded spots.
Yes, and so you're seeing that go backward. The car's a little bit of a dog, but the team goes, see what you can do with it, Danny Rick. And you know what? If he puts himself ahead of Yuki, if he out-qualifies him, if you start to see those 1 and 2/10 differences on those laps, then it's Coitons for our favorite diminutive cussing driver on the grid. So this weekend, though, you've got a sprint format, right? We got sprint races this weekend, which is always fun because you kind of push everything up a day, and you have like some actual more laps of racing that actually means points. So what are we looking forward to with the at the Hungaroring and the Hungarian GP here?
Yeah, we also have our first tryout of the new format for qualifying, where they specify what compound you have to qualify
tires
on.
Yeah.
So Q1 hard, Q2 mediums, and Q3 softs. So
what do you think about that? That's kind of an interesting thing because everybody's, I guess, on equal playing field.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting. So the whole reasoning behind it is they're issuing 11 tire sets instead of 13. So there's 2 fewer tire sets.
Why?
The whole net zero, get to zero carbon emissions.
Right.
So fewer tires, fewer resources, all that stuff to run a race weekend. So that being the case, they're just defining what race tire you have to run during which. I think it'll be interesting because obviously they're trying to reserve a certain amount of sets for the race. And so how many are teams going to take less runs, during qualifying? Does Red Bull, saying, hey, we're going to need some hards and some mediums for the race. So Max, you only get one pass at this and you got to make sure it's good in Q1 or Q2.
Wow,
That's possible.
Yeah. And then those teams who are like, we never get out of Q1. Put the softs on. Let's give us our best shot. That's not happening.
They can't do that either. Yeah. So I like the idea of playing with qualifying. I don't think that the qualifying format's totally been nailed. My dream would be single lap qualifying. Everyone goes one at a time because I think that just puts so much pressure to perform and be perfect on each
la
driver.
The Indianapolis 500 kind of a deal.
Right, yeah. And so it's like you go out there, you get one hot lap, everyone's watching you, and max, if you screw up, you don't get a second chance at it. I think it would introduce a lot more variability into the starting grid if we went to single lap qualifying, but we don't have that yet. So I'll take
They do that because of the time constraints that go along with it? Because you can do that simultaneous timing. I think just from the perspective of safety, how many times have you seen guys on the track and you're like, oh, boy, he had to dive out of the way of that guy? That is insane to me when guys are going 210 miles an hour and the other guy's going 60 and, he just kind of gets over a little bit and you're like, we're asking for a disaster to happen.
Yeah, Alonso talked about this recently when, that came up in one of the qualifying. He's like, the answer to this is just let one car out on the track at a time. And he thought it would make for more exciting qualifying too, which I agree. But we don't have that yet. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. This was supposed to happen in, I think it was Baku, but because it rained, they kind of threw that out the window, so everyone just ran wets instead.
Yeah.
So I think that's one thing to look forward to. As far as upgrades go, Alpha Tauri is supposed to be bringing a bunch of upgrades, not just their driver, but a lot of other aero stuff. It's going to be, I think, a very close race because it is a short lap, medium speed track that will kind of drive a tighter balance between downforce and drag and all of that. So you won't have, I think, Red Bull seen as much of an advantage with their like super low drag at high speed stuff. Yeah,
they kind of saw that coming, right? They were like, this British Grand Prix has been awesome for us. Because we don't see the same thing kind of happening in Hungary for us either. And I mean, Lando kind of hinted to that. But are there teams that the opposite effect happens, that they're really good? Do we know? Are there good teams that are good medium speed? Like, I don't know. That's the kind of stuff you would study.
We'll find out. We know who it's not, and it's not Williams, and it's probably now not McLaren and Red Bull. I think Aston Martin Mercedes is who I'm going to have my eye on this weekend to see how they do in this medium speed track.
I was listening to an interview this week, and it was with, I think it was maybe Ferrari's technical director, and he's like, we are the 9th and 10th fastest team on the grid this week, but with the bad luck of the safety car, we're probably more like 6th and 7th fastest. And I was going, well, that's not exciting.
Hedging with the safety car.
He goes, we got kind of screwed by the safety car. Yeah. We could have been 6th and 7th. And I was like, nobody in Tifosi wants to hear that. Nobody in Italy wants to hear, dude, we could have been 6th and 7th this week if we would have played our cards right. Like, they better figure it out. I don't know. Like, I don't know what it's going to look like because in the end, everybody's bringing all these upgrades and everybody talks about upgrades and they talk about them like they are so super game changing, and I don't know if that's necessarily the case.
Yeah, and we're getting into the section of the season where Red Bull's limitations on wind tunnel time and CFD development time is catching up with them, and in the back half of the season we should see that the other teams are bringing upgrades more often than Red Bull is. Now there is reports out that they're bringing upgrades this week that has found them another 10th or 2, but we've gone into each weekend with a prediction, and then we seem to be surprised on like, oh, McLaren is resurged or Ferrari's resurged. And so that's going back to where everyone but Red Bull seems to be kind of up and down in really close competitiveness. And, hopefully as a group, they start to catch Red Bull more.
Does Max have the super sweep again this weekend? Do they do fastest lap in the sprint race?
No, there's not a point for.
Okay.
Yeah.
Either way. Wins the sprint race, wins the big race, and gets the fastest lap. I don't know.
I wouldn't bet against it. Yeah, I think it's going to be a full points haul for Max.
Are we going to see somebody else on the? I mean, we've seemed to be getting a couple of different kind of podiums here and there. So we're going to see some new guys up there on the steps.
Yeah, Lando definitely has momentum carrying out of last week, and then Alonso called it at the beginning of the season that he felt this was going to be his most competitive race.
They named Hungary, right?
It's he said Hungary's where we're going to have our best chance. So, I think an Alonso podium. It's been a few weeks since he's been on the podium, so I think this could be his weekend to get back up there.
Plan 33, right? Yeah. Wasn't it what the whole thing was for this year? They have all sorts of and they've been non-existent the last few weeks. Like, we haven't seen them anywhere near. What about Danny Rick? What's a real expectation, I think, for him? Is it 17th and down to 20th, or I mean, I just envision everybody voting him driver of the day just because.
Oh, because, yeah. Yeah. I think that between 10th and 15th is the expectation.
Really? I mean, if he's in the points, chalk it up for another piece of.
Yeah, I think 10th or higher. If he's in the points, that'll be like, oh my gosh, this is he's driven this thing well past its limits. So I guess 11th to 15th would be my expectation. If he's 16th to 20th, other than a reliability issue, I think there will be questions of does he still have it?
Does Checo check out of qualifying again, or does Checo the guy puts himself at the back of the grid and then just what an amazing drive from coming up, but nobody at Red Bull's impressed because you botch your own. You take points away from the team when you botch your own qualifying, and that's they're like, we actually we don't need you because Max is winning the championship by himself. So you falling back in qualifying doesn't help us when you get 6th place and we're all excited for you because you had a heck of a drive back from 15th. Sergio's got to be on some sort of a hot seat, even if he's not, getting canned. There still is the feeling of Sergio's lost it, and then it's all about momentum. It's all about that PR, and right now, his is
his draft stock is down
going
right now.
So far back.
Yeah, and it's with Danny in that other junior team seat, he has to feel the pressure that it's getting put on him, and it's just kind of this masterstroke from Red Bull of one change. They put Yuki on notice, they put Sergio on notice. And they get to try a flyer at, a guy who's a race winner that they know really well who could take that seat. So it's like they killed 3 birds with one stone, I think, with this move.
Oh, and they get to do it for so cheap too.
They're
barely paying Danny Rick, who was making $20 million at
McLaren.
At McLaren, and 15 or 17 million at
Renault.
At Renault. So they get him on the cheap. Maybe he gets that resurgence, and people are talking about Red Bull and Alpha Tauri more this week than we've heard in weeks, even with the guy basically an automatic win every week. So, Dan Jimenez. Dan, thanks for coming up, man, and doing the podcast.
Pleasure.
We love doing this. Download the podcast, tell your friends, teach a neighbor about F1, and let's get this thing going. And we're looking forward to this race weekend in Hungary. We'll talk to you next week on a race review of how everything went. For Dan and Alex, we'll see you next time, everybody.